and the sound of a chest collapsing is something you never forget. It's a wet, jagged noise that cuts through the midnight air like a serrated blade through dry wood, and I was pulling my custom fat boy into the deep shadows of an abandoned textile mill, just looking to tighten a loose mirror before the final stretch home, and when that sound stopped me dead in my tracks. The humidity of the Georgia night was thick enough to choke a man, smelling of stagnant river water, rusted iron, and the heavy scent of pine needle rot. As I flicked on my tactical light, the beam cut through the tall, yellowed grass, and catching something that made the desert heat of the engine feel like ice against my skin. He couldn't have been more than 16, and he was curled into a tight fetal position behind a rotted tractor tire, his face so pale it looked translucent under the harsh LED glare. His hands were stained dark, and clutching a side that was clearly shattered, his fingers trembling with a rhythm that screamed late-stage shock. And I've been the sergeant-at-arms for this chapter for more years than I care to count. I've seen men broken in ways that would make a trauma surgeon faint, but the look in this kid's eyes, the raw, animal terror of being hunted, hit me in a place I thought I'd long ago buried under layers of leather and road dust. And I knelt beside him, my heavy leather jacket creaking in the silence of the woods. As I reached for my phone to call in a medical emergency, his bloodied hand shot out, and gripping my wrist with a desperate, bone-crushing strength. He pulled me down, his breath smelling of copper and raw panic, and whispered 4 words that changed the course of my life and the fate of an entire city. Don't call the police. I didn't ask why. In this part of the country, and where the pines grow thick and the law grows thin, you learn to read the silence between the words. I looked at the boy's ribs, and the way his shirt was imprinted with the heavy, diamond-shaped tread of a professional combat boot, and I knew this wasn't a random mugging or a schoolyard scrap, and this was a message. This was a calculated attempt to break a human being. I clicked my radio, and, bypassing the local channels and hitting the encrypted frequency reserved for the inner circle of the clubhouse, I told them I had a stray lamb at the old mill, and I told them he was broken, and he was being hunted. I told them I needed the flock, and I needed them to come silent and come heavy, and I didn't have to wait for a confirmation. Within 10 minutes, the vibration began, a low and subsonic thrumming that shook the remaining shards of glass out of the mill's broken windows. It wasn't the roar of a parade or the vanity of a weekend rider, and it was the disciplined, muffled growl of 89 Hell's Angels moving like a single dark tide across the valley. They didn't use sirens. They didn't use high beams. And they arrived like a shadow one by one, and cutting their engines and letting the momentum carry them into the gravel lot until the silence was replaced by the ticking of 89 cooling engines. Big Mac, and our president, was the first off his bike. He didn't say a word. He just looked at the kid, then at Doc, and our club medic who had spent 3 tours patching up soldiers in the middle of active war zones. Doc moved in with the precision of a machine, and his hands gentle as he assessed the damage. He looked up at us, his face grim under the moonlight. 3 ribs cracked, one likely floating and threatening a lung, and the internal bruising was severe, and the kid was minutes away from his airway closing up. The boy, whose name was Leo, and finally started to drift as the medicine Doc administered took hold, but before the darkness took him, he spilled the truth in a voice that was barely a rasp, and it was the Iron Spikes, a crew of low-lifes who had taken over his neighborhood, running a protection racket out of the local grocery store. And Leo had been working there to help his mom, Sarah, pay the rent after his dad passed away from cancer. And he'd seen the Iron Spikes loading more than just crates of produce into the back of a precinct cruiser. He'd seen the local sergeant, a man named Miller, and laughing as he took a thick, grease-stained envelope of cash. They caught Leo watching through the security feed. They didn't just fire him, and they dragged him into the back alley and used him as a punching bag to show the neighborhood what happens to people who look too closely at the gears of corruption. Then, and they told him they were coming to his house at midnight to finish the job while his mother watched. It was currently 1:20 p.m., and the realization hit us like a physical blow to the gut. These cowards weren't just thugs, they were a cancer protected by the very people supposed to cut it out. And Big Mac stood up, his massive frame blotting out the moon, his eyes reflecting the cold, hard fire of a man who had seen enough of the world's cruelty. 89 of us, and he said, his voice a low vibration that seemed to come from the core of the earth itself, "And we have 40 minutes to make sure that street becomes a graveyard for anyone who tries to touch that house. Mount up." We didn't ride in a pack, and we split into cells of 4, navigating the back alleys, the forgotten service roads, and the dirt paths of the town to avoid the corrupt patrols of Sergeant Miller, and we moved like ghosts through the rising mist, our hearts beating in perfect sync with the heavy pistons of our machines. As we converged on Leo's Street and a dead-end road of small, weathered houses where the paint was peeling and the hope was even thinner, the scene was already unfolding, and 2 black SUVs were idling in front of Leo's house, their high beams pointed at the front door like spotlights on a slaughterhouse floor. 4 men were on the porch, and one of them holding a heavy iron bar, another splashing what smelled like industrial gasoline onto the wooden stairs. They were laughing, the kind of cruel and high-pitched laughter of men who think they are untouchable because they have a badge in their pocket and a gun on their hip, and they didn't hear us until we were 20 feet away. We didn't just pull up, we swarmed. 89 bikes flooded the street, forming a perfect and impenetrable ring of steel around the SUVs and the porch, and the sound of 89 kickstands hitting the pavement at the exact same moment sounded like a firing squad chambering their rounds. The men on the porch froze, and the one with the iron bar dropped it, the metallic clang echoing through the silent neighborhood like a funeral bell. They looked around, their eyes wide with the sudden and terrifying realization that they had brought knives to a tank fight. Big Mac walked into the light of their own high beams, and his leather cut and the death's head patch on his back radiating a terrifying authority that no badge could match. "You're on the wrong porch," Mac said, and his voice eerily calm, the kind of calm that exists in the eye of a hurricane. From the shadows of the lead SUV, a man stepped out, Sergeant Miller. He was in full uniform, and his badge shining under the streetlights, but his face was twisted in a sneer of pure arrogance. "You bikers are out of your jurisdiction," Miller barked, and his hand hovering near his holster. "This is an official police matter, and get your junk heaps out of here, before I start making arrests for unlawful assembly and obstruction of justice." I stepped forward next to Mac and the rest of the 88 brothers, closing the gap until we were a wall of leather and muscle, just inches from the sergeant's face. "And you lost your badge the second you took that envelope at the grocery store, Miller," I told him, my voice flat and cold. "We aren't here for an assembly, and we're here for a total takeover." Miller tried to reach for his radio, but he quickly realized the airwaves were dead, and we had a brother in the back of a van 3 blocks away jamming every police frequency in the area. Miller was alone and trapped between the criminals he protected and the brotherhood he had provoked. Inside the house, we saw the curtain move. Sarah, Leo's mom, was peering out, and her face etched with a terror that slowly began to turn into a fragile disbelief. She saw the bikes. She saw the patches. She saw that for the first time in years, and the wolves were being held at bay by something much more dangerous. While Mac and I kept Miller and his thugs pinned in the street, and Doc and a few others slipped into the house through the back door. They didn't go in to fight, they went in to protect. They sat with Sarah, they checked the windows, and they told her that as long as there was gas in our tanks and blood in our veins, she would never have to be afraid in her own home again. The standoff lasted for hours, and we didn't move. We didn't blink. We stayed through the deepest, darkest part of the night, a silent, immovable guard, and every time Miller or his thugs tried to move toward their vehicles, 89 engines would rev simultaneously, and a mechanical roar that shook the very foundations of the street and sent a clear message. The only way out was in handcuffs. It was psychological warfare, and we wanted them to feel the weight of their own insignificance. We wanted them to know that their power was a lie built on the fear of the weak, and that fear didn't work on us. By 40:00 a.m., the iron spikes were shivering, and their bravado completely shattered by the cold and the unrelenting stare of 89 men who lived by a code they couldn't understand. And that's when the real shift happened. We hadn't called the local precinct. We had reached out to a contact in the State Bureau of Investigation, and a man who had been trying to nail Miller for years, but lacked the physical evidence and the witnesses brave enough to speak. And with 89 Hell's Angels standing guard over a kid with cracked ribs and a mother ready to tell her story, The SBI finally had everything they needed, and when the state troopers rolled onto the street, they didn't arrest us. They walked straight to Miller and stripped him of his badge and his service weapon right there on the asphalt and threw him into the back of a cage. The iron spikes followed, and their heads hanging in shame as they were led away in industrial zip ties. But the story didn't end with the arrests. The Motor Mafia doesn't just clear the trash, and we rebuild the home. For the next 3 weeks, that street became our clubhouse. We took over the entire block, and we set up a rotation where 20 bikes were always parked in front of Sarah's house, their chrome gleaming in the sun, and we realized the iron spikes had been terrorizing the whole neighborhood, not just Leo's family. So we did a full community clean-up, and we spent our own money to fix the streetlights Miller had intentionally let burn out. We repainted the houses that had been tagged with gang signs, and we even held a fundraiser at the grocery store, the one Leo used to work at, and made sure the new management knew that Leo was now an associate of the club, and we made it clear that if anyone so much as looked at him wrong, they'd be answering to the 89 men who had reclaimed this street. One afternoon, and about a month later, I was sitting on the porch with Leo. He was still in a medical brace, but his color had come back, and he was finally smiling again. And he looked out at the street, which was now full of kids playing and neighbors talking over their fences. Things that hadn't happened in this neighborhood in over a decade, and he asked me why we did it. He said we didn't even know them, that we didn't live there. I looked at my bike, parked at the curb, and then at the scars on my own knuckles from years of fighting for what's right, and I told him that the world is full of people who think they can break things because they think nobody is watching. We make sure they know someone is always watching, and we didn't just take over your street, Leo, we took back the idea that a kid should be able to walk home without looking over his shoulder. That is the code, and that is the brotherhood, and the moral complexity of the situation became clear when we started digging into the iron spikes ledgers we'd recovered from the store's back office. And this wasn't just a local racket. They were part of a much larger network that was moving stolen medical supplies and narcotics across state lines and using Miller's cruisers to bypass state checkpoints. By standing up for one kid with cracked ribs, and we had accidentally pulled the thread that unraveled a multi-million-dollar criminal operation that spanned 4 states. The news called it a biker vigilante act, but the people on that street called it a miracle. We didn't care about the labels, and we cared about the fact that Sarah could sleep with her doors unlocked and the windows open to the summer breeze, and we cared about the fact that Leo was going to graduate high school instead of becoming another forgotten statistic in a crime report. And the final revelation moment came when we held a massive ride for Leo's birthday. We didn't just have 89 bikes that day, we had over 300, and clubs from 3 different states showed up to ride past Leo's house and salute the kid who had been brave enough to whisper those 4 words. And as the sea of chrome and leather flowed down that once forgotten street, the sound wasn't just noise, it was a symphony of justice, and we had turned a place of fear into a fortress of hope. As I looked back in my mirror at the end of that day, I saw Leo standing on his porch and wearing a small leather vest we'd made him with a custom patch. He waved until we were out of sight. He wasn't a victim anymore. He was a survivor and a brother in spirit if not in name. As long as the Motor Mafia is on the road, he will never have to worry about the wolves again. Because we don't just ride for the wind, and we ride for the broken. We ride for the silent. And when we take over a street, we don't give it back until it's safe for the children to walk on it again. And that is our promise. That is our life. And that is why 89 bikers is be more powerful than 1,000 cowards with badges and iron bars. And the street belongs to the people now, but the legend belongs to the brotherhood. The legacy of that night continues to grow every single day, and Leo is an adult now, and he's one of the best custom mechanics in the state. He works in our shop, his hands grease-stained and strong, far from the trembling and bloody fingers I first met at the old mill. Sarah still sends a batch of home-baked cookies to the clubhouse every Christmas, and every year, and we send a full detail of bikes to escort her to her husband's grave on his anniversary. It's a cycle of loyalty that can't be broken by time, distance, or the threats of men who think they are above the law. We showed that neighborhood that they had power, and they haven't let it go since the day Miller was hauled away. And they formed their own watch groups, they look out for each other, and they know that if they ever see a black SUV idling where it shouldn't be, and they have 89 brothers who will drop everything to make it right. Not is the true community impact, not just the repairs to the houses or the physical protection, but the permanent, tectonic change in the spirit of a people who were once forgotten. We gave them their pride back, and that is a gift that never stops giving. So, as the sun sets over the Georgia pines and the engines begin to roar for our nightly run, remember the story of the kid with the cracked ribs, and remember that no matter how dark the night gets or how deep the corruption runs, there is always a brotherhood ready to walk through the fire with you. And we are the Hell's Angels, and we never forget a promise. We never leave a brother behind, and we never ever let a street stay in the hands of the wolves. And every time I shift gears on the highway, I think about that night at the old mill. I think about the weight of Leo's hand on my wrist and the desperate and rattling whisper that started this entire revolution. It's a reminder that one person's courage, no matter how small or broken they may seem, can ignite an entire army's resolve. We aren't just a club of riders, we are a response to a world that has forgotten how to care for its own. And we are the shadow that protects the light. If you ever find yourself on a dark street and feeling the ribs in your chest crack under the pressure of a world that wants to break you, just listen for the hum. Listen for the vibration in the ground. And because we are out there 89 strong and growing every day, and we are just waiting for the call to take over another street and bring the light back to the darkness. Ride hard, live fast, and never, ever, and let the bullies think they've won. Because the Hell's Angels are always just one radio call away from turning a nightmare back into a dream. And the air in the clubhouse tonight is thick with the smell of oil and brotherhood. We're preparing for another run, and another chance to find those who have been cast aside by a broken system. I look at the map on the wall, marked with the places we've been and the lives we've touched, and Leo's street is highlighted in gold. It's a reminder that our mission is never truly over. As long as there are sergeants like Miller and crews like the Iron Spikes, and there will be a need for the 89. We don't do it for the recognition, and we certainly don't do it for the money, and we do it for that moment when a mother realizes she doesn't have to hide anymore. We do it for the kid who realizes he's got a whole family he never knew existed. And we are the watchers on the highway, the guardians of the dead and roads, and the nightmare of anyone who thinks they can prey on the innocent. The road ahead is long, and the nights are often cold, but as long as we have each other, and as long as the code remains unbroken, we will keep riding. We will keep fighting, and we will keep taking over every street that needs a little bit of heavered by men who aren't afraid of a little bit of hell. This is our story. This is our life, and this is the Motor Mafia, and we are just getting started. I can still feel the vibration of the bikes in my chest when I close my eyes. It's a comfort and a reminder that I'm part of something much bigger than myself. The 89 men who took over that street didn't just change Leo's life, they changed their own. And they found a purpose beyond the road, a reason to keep the engines running and the leather polished. And we found out that the greatest strength isn't in the muscles or the weapons, but in the willingness to stand in the gap for someone who can't stand for themselves. And that night, Leo became a symbol for all of us. He was the reason we survived the lean years and the internal struggles. And he was the proof that the Hell's Angels still had a heart, and that heart was beating louder than any engine. As we roll out tonight, and the moon is full and the road is calling, we leave the clubhouse in a single, thunderous line, the headlights cutting a path through the darkness, and we know where we're going, and we know what we have to do. There's another kid out there, another mother in trouble, another street that needs to be reclaimed, and we won't stop until every single one of them knows that they aren't alone. The legacy of the 89 lives on in every mile we cover and every life we save. And that, and more than anything, is why we ride. That is why we are the Angels. That is why we will never, ever back down. The street is waiting, and we are ready to take it over.